The following programming is sponsored by the Pennsylvania Pro-Life Federation. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or Beasley Media Group.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Positively Pro-Life, a podcast brought to you by the Pennsylvania Pro-Life Federation. Positively Pro-Life aims to bring you inspirational stories, important legislative updates, and informative interviews as we restore and strengthen a culture of life. I'm Bonnie Finnerty, Education Director at the Federation, and I am joined today by my esteemed colleague, Maria Gallagher, the Legislative Director. Hello, Maria.
Hello, Bonnie. It's great to be with you today.
Great to be with you. I think we're both very eager to talk to today's guest about a topic that actually both you and I have written about, and we've actually discussed on this podcast before. And that is the University of Pittsburgh's use of aborted baby body parts in the research projects that they do. Our listeners and our viewers might remember that last September, we interviewed David Daleiden of the Center for Medical Progress about his investigation into Pitt and the horrific information he uncovered. Since then, and largely because of the pressure that resulted from that expose, the university hired a law firm to conduct an investigation. Today, we will discuss the outcomes of that investigation with Madeline Osburn, managing editor at the online news source, The Federalist. She's been writing on this topic, and she'll be able to provide valuable insight as to what the investigation did and did not do, and which questions remain. Not only are many Pennsylvanians disgusted by what seems like a breach of medical ethics and human dignity, they're also alarmed that this gruesome research may have been and might continue to be subsidized by their tax dollars. So we will talk to Madeline in just a few moments. Before we do that, we want to catch everyone up on legislative matters as we do each podcast. And this week, Maria will discuss the valiant efforts to stop the pro-abortion Women's Health Protection Act. First, however, we're going to pivot to our inspiration segment with a very positive, uplifting story to kick off today's podcast. And it's one that's very timely because for the last 2 weeks, I've been talking about success stories due to the abortion pill reversal process. We heard both Emily and Rachel's stories of saving their babies from chemical abortion even after taking the first abortion pill. Theirs are just two of many, many stories that are featured on the Abortion Pill Reversal Network website. Well, this week, we learned through social media of a success story right here in our own state, specifically in the Philadelphia area. I'm calling this a Pennsylvania love story, or a Philly love story, right? It is the city of love. A life was saved thanks to two Pennsylvanian women, Dr. Monique Ruberu, an OBGYN, and Marlene Downing, who had been the director at that time of the Hope Pregnancy Center when a woman started a chemical abortion 9 months ago. Dr. Ruberu wrote in her Facebook post, one that has been shared 565 times, wrote this: 9 months ago, a scared young girl went into 777 Apple Tree and took an abortion pill. She later regretted this choice and searched the web to find out if anything could be done. She found abortionpillreversal.com. Dr. Ruberu further explained that because this young woman had a peanut allergy, she was directed to go to the ER, but the ER could not help her with a shot of progesterone, which is what she needed. She was desperate, so the young woman searched on the web and she came across Marlene Downing at the Hope Pregnancy Center, and she called her late at night. Marlene took that call and then she called Dr. Ruberu, who agreed to meet this girl at the unusually late hour in her office. Dr. Ruberu administered her first progesterone shot and prayed with her and with Marlene. A subsequent ultrasound confirmed that the baby was still alive, and the three women celebrated by going out to lunch together. That was 9 months ago. On February 25th, that young woman delivered a beautiful baby girl who was doing well, thanks to these two champions of life, Marlene Downing and Dr. Monique Ruberu. and thanks to the life-saving intervention of the abortion pill reversal. What a beautiful, true story of love and life. May this be a story we continue to tell and replicate. Maria.
Bonnie, thank you so much for that inspirational story. Now, I'd like to talk about Chuck Schumer and pro-abortion Senate Democrats hoping to run roughshod over state pro-life laws. Senate Democrats, led by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, failed to invoke cloture on a bill that would have enshrined abortion in federal law and policies and override nearly all existing state laws. The motion failed by a vote of 46 to 48. The abortion zealotry of the Democratic majority in the Senate was on full display, said Carol Tobias, president of National Right to Life. This far-reaching legislation would have run roughshod over the will of the American people and endangered the lives of women and their unborn babies. No Republicans supported the measure, and they were joined in their opposition by only one Democrat, Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania, unfortunately, voted the wrong way. This extremist legislation, which needed 60 votes to advance, failed to even garner a majority of U.S. senators. The so-called Women's Health Protection Act should be called the No Limits on Abortion Until Birth Act, said Tobias. This legislation would have made sweeping changes, including expanding taxpayer funding of abortion and eliminating requirements that a woman be given information about the development of her unborn child so she can make an informed decision. This legislation would quash nearly all existing protective state laws, said Jennifer Popick, Director of Federal Legislation for National Right to Life. In addition, this legislation also would have prohibited states from adopting new protective laws in the future, even laws specifically upheld as constitutionally permissible by the U.S. Supreme Court. Popick continued, with this bill, elective abortion would have become the procedure that must always be facilitated, never delayed, never impeded to the slightest degree. That was from a National Right to Life news release, and we are happy to say that that dreadful bill did not pass and that lives are going to be protected as a result. Bonnie.
Thank you, Maria. That is good news indeed. It's my honor to introduce today's guest. Madeline Osburn is managing editor at The Federalist. In late January, she reported on the investigation into the University of Pittsburgh's research practices using aborted baby body parts. Her article, University of Pittsburgh Report Tries to Explain Away Barbaric Experiments with Aborted Babies, points out problems with the investigation and identifies many questions that remain unanswered. We are fortunate to have Madeline join us today to discuss an issue that should be of concern to everyone, everywhere, especially Pennsylvanians, and that is Pitt's use of aborted baby parts in scientific research. Welcome, Madeline.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's so good for you to be with us today. And I want to start out by asking, how did you come to learn about the highly controversial research at the University of Pittsburgh?
I think it was just a compilation of several different pro-life sites that kind of started flagging it. But when I really started reporting on it was when the Pennsylvania legislature was holding a hearing on these studies in particular. I guess, what the pro-life sites had brought this to legislators and said, are you guys just going to let this go? And so they held a hearing and started asking Pitt questions about where they were getting the tissue for their experiments. So that's where I first started following it, was after that hearing.
Now, were you surprised at all about the university's use of human scalps in research on mice?
I don't know if surprised is the right word, so much as just confused. The I mean, just the thought of it. So you can see the pictures in the study that they published. They included pictures, and basically what you look at is baby scalps that have been grafted onto lab rats, and you can see the little baby hairs like growing as if the same way they would if that infant was still alive. And so for me, it's not surprising, it's disgusting, but it's also just confusing because I don't really understand what kind of the modern scientific benefit of that type of study is. They call them humanized lab rats. So I'm not really sure what you're gaining by that type of research. I mean, we do research like this all the time. Like even you saw recently in the news, Dr. Fauci was being criticized for his gruesome experiments on dogs and puppies, and how dogs reacted to certain types of parasites and bugs and whatnot. And so even that you could try to justify it saying like, well, they're trying to find, a new medicine for dogs or whatever. I don't know what humanizing lab rats is accomplishing. So I don't know if surprise is the right word as much as just confused.
Now, the university hired a law firm to investigate its research practices. Why do some people call the investigation a whitewash?
Right. So there's a law firm in DC called Hyman, Phelps and McNamara. We just call them HPM for short. And they specialize mostly in FDA regulations. So trying to help drug companies get through the legal hoops of FDA regulations and getting their drugs on the market. And so the University of Pittsburgh hired this firm to kind of help them, I think, get around, this is in the similar vein of what they do. And so they were hired to conduct a regulatory assessment. And basically the gist of their report is there's nothing to see here. We investigated it and everything looks okay. And the reason why that is arguably not true is because they limited the scope of their investigation. So they said they investigated Pitt's research practices, but they didn't even really investigate where Pitt was obtaining their fetuses from, or where they were getting their tissue was from, or how the places where they were getting their tissue from was obtaining, what kind of abortions were they performing? Were they live birth? How are they getting these, not to be gruesome, but fresh beating hearts to use in their experiments? You have to perform a certain type of full term live birth abortion to obtain certain types of tissues. And so they didn't really, the investigators didn't even look at those. They specifically didn't invest, and they said this if you read the report, they say this right at the beginning. They say, we didn't investigate the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. So UPMC, they claim, is separate from the University of Pittsburgh. They share a name, but they don't share, I guess, funding or resources. They claim they're two separate entities, and the University of Pittsburgh is not in any way responsible for the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. That's kind of a mouthful, and legally it may be true, but when you start digging into it, you realize things like the University of Pittsburgh actually has labs inside the UPMC buildings. So it's like, yes, maybe on paper they're fully separate, but you are absolutely conducting abortions inside one room, and then taking fetuses and tissue to the lab literally next door in the same building. So that's kind of why we say it was a whitewash, because from the beginning they were intentionally not investigating certain aspects of what people are concerned about.
So that leads to my question: why do some observers believe additional investigation of the research practices is needed?
Well, because we still want answers, right? This report was not conclusive. Like it actually raised more questions, right? So one of the big questions was the investigators straight up claimed, oh, well, they said they didn't obtain fetuses from UPMC. Well, if you read the study, specifically the one about humanizing lab rats, in the footnotes, it says, we obtain these fetuses from UPMC. So you just have lots of contradictory statements and really just a lot of still unanswered questions the report didn't really answer.
Another point that was brought up, some people are concerned about the conflict of interest between the university, UPMC, and Planned Parenthood, the overlap. Is that something that you came across as well?
Yeah, so that was another area that the report attempted to address, but kind of just looked the other way. So, and this is something that David Delighted, who you mentioned earlier, has done a lot of reporting on, just the overlap between Planned Parenthood and UPMC and the University of Pittsburgh, because there is a large Planned Parenthood location about 6 minutes away from UPMC. And you have this long-standing relationship between the UPMC and this Planned Parenthood location, where you have faculty members will go over and moonlight as abortionists at the Planned Parenthood. Or if you just look at some of the names and the careers of the people that work at that Planned Parenthood, you will see they all studied at Pitt, or they all used to work at Pitt, or they still work at Pitt. And so again, like, sure, that's not necessarily illegal. And that's kind of what the report said. The investigators, I have right here, they said, there's no law, quote, there's no law preventing Pitt from supporting Planned Parenthood of Western Pennsylvania if it chooses to do so. So they basically said, yeah, and this is not illegal. But this is kind of like a conflict of interest, because where this gets really important is that basically what the university points to is like, well, we are above the board, on all ethical things, and we have a review board, their IRB, that reviews every, research project that comes across our desk, and we review where we're getting human tissue from, and we review all these things, and it all goes to the review board who approves these things. Well, who's on the review board? One example is one of the chairs of the review board is Dr. Beatrice Chen, who is also the medical director of that Planned Parenthood location and oversees Planned Parenthood's training. So you just have, that's just one example, but you have lots of conflicts of interest. So like, of course, if Planned Parenthood is, if they are not donating fetal tissue, for the research, why would the university, obviously there's incentives there that need to be investigated. So.
Yeah, and it's my understanding that in addition to this, the law firm that was hired by the university has ties to alumni. So we're not sure that there was going to be, the transparency that needed to happen.
Absolutely. The university got to pick their investigators. They didn't open it up to the third party like legislators or anything like that, right? They got to handpick who wrote this report for them.
Mm-hmm. So another question I have is, one thing that the report did, the investigation, so to speak, did share, was they acknowledged that there was a problem with how the hospitals obtained consent from the women when they were asked to contribute fetal tissue. Can you go into what some of those issues were and why that's such an important topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So when a woman decides she wants an abortion, it's state law that they have to wait 24 hours before even asking the woman about donating her baby part and her fetal tissue. So, and that's to prevent any kind of like persuasion, right? Any incentive for encouraging the abortion. So that's state law. And what the investigators found was some of the wording on these consent forms. Even if a woman had waited the 24 hours, she could still theoretically show up 24 hours, go in for her appointment, go home, show up 24 hours later for the actual procedure, and be presented with these forms by a nurse or the abortionist, which it's also against state law for the person who's performing the abortion to actually be the one to present this consent form. And this consent form says things like, quote, this donating your baby may contribute to a new discovery or treatment. And also calls it a, quote, potential benefit to society. So kind of, juicing up the language here as an incentive. If a woman had decided she'd want an abortion, went home and changed her mind, came back for her procedure, and then was presented with these forms, there's an entirely legitimate possible scenario here where these forms could be, well, I was maybe against it, but now if you're saying I could donate it and it's a potential benefit to society, I guess let's just go ahead with it. So that was one of the things that they found was, a problem. And they found that the paperwork, all of these forms were unsigned, and that they were indeed presented by people who were performing the procedures, and just things not really up to code.
And I doubt any of the women were told that the baby scalps would be used to be sewn on the back of rats.
Exactly. Highly doubtful. You're just presented, it's just called tissue, and it's just going to be donated to this quote unquote stem cell research or something very abstract, versus like if they were told actually how their baby's organs were going to be used, I don't think they would be consenting to it.
Right. And those scalps came from 18 to 20-week-old fetuses. Those are probably pain capable babies. So, I mean, it's awful to even imagine this whole process. It's so gruesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not even, a lot of people chalk this up to, well, this is, they're only using these things in full term, late term abortion, and those never happen. But you're right. Exactly. The study itself says, this is an 18-week-old fetus. That's, still second trimester.
I'm wondering other avenues of investigation that would be warranted in this case. And I'm thinking of, I've heard lawmakers wonder aloud whether there are other universities who are involved in this sort of research, and to what extent taxpayer dollars are funding that. Do you think that's another area that should be explored?
Well, so I think that is what I would encourage listeners to go follow David Leiden's work, because he's really done the nitty gritty of like getting into law and how we can use the law or what's already on the books to investigate these things further. But, it's infanticide is illegal in every state, I believe. And what needs to be investigated is, are abortionists skirting the laws here to obtain certain types of organs for their experiments. And so I don't know how you do that other than using state houses and legislatures to push for that, or attorney generals pushing for that. I don't necessarily see a way using police or anything like that, right? Because it's hard to prosecute people after the fact, after they've donated it. So I think it's going to be up to states, and states who are willing to use the power of the laws that are already on the books to do that. And I think there is one, I'm forgetting her name now, but there's the one Pennsylvania representatives that pushed for this. She's kind of gone MIA. And so there's been some questions about that too. Like, well, you called for this investigation, where's the follow-up? And so I think it's just a matter of continuing to stay on it and not letting them get away with it, and not letting, just not getting discouraged in the fight.
And one of the really troubling aspects of this is this idea that partial birth abortions may have been performed, which are clearly in violation of the law, and which we thought disappeared a long time ago because of the US Supreme Court ruling outlawing them. Did you find that surprising at all, that allegation?
Yeah, absolutely, right? Because when you read about, so not to go into like the research side more too deeply, but one of the things that David talks about is there are certain experiments where you want the heart still beating, or you want the kidneys still pumping fluid like kidneys are supposed to do. And so Pitt themselves has bragged about their ability to specialize in these types of abortions to keep the organs, I don't know another word to use other than fresh, like recently most quickly harvested and taken to the labs. And they've bragged about their ability to do that, and as a marker of how great their research is, right? And so that's what David's really pointed out and said, you can only achieve that via partial birth abortion. So you can't claim, yeah, we're really good at harvesting tissue this way, but then turn around and claim, but we're not doing partial birth abortion, like we're not doing infanticide. There's only one way to attain that type of tissue.
And for the record, the university has denied these allegations. I want to thank you, Madeline Osburn, managing editor at the Federalist, so much for being with us today. You certainly are a wonderful investigative journalist, and we are honored that you were on the program with us.
Thank you for having me. It was great to be here.
You're welcome. Positively Pro-Life is made possible through the generous support of the members of the Pennsylvania Pro-Life Federation all across the Commonwealth. The Pennsylvania Pro-Life Federation is the largest single-issue pro-life organization in the Keystone State, with more than 40 local county-based chapters. We shine a spotlight on the most vulnerable individuals, from the very dawn of life to the twilight of life. To learn more about the inspiring work of the Federation, please visit our website at www.paprolife.org. You can also find us on all major social media. Just look for PA Pro-Life. My thanks to my affable co-host, Bonnie Finnerty, and for you, the listeners who inspire us each week. Thank you for joining us. And remember, there's always a reason to choose life.